Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic podcast with Rod Dreer. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin, and we are here, I believe, for episode 19. Rod, Budapest, what's up? How you doing, brother?
I'm doing terrible, man. Can you see the bags under my eyes? I was up at the crack of dawn. I was supposed to be in Paris today for the start of the Live Not By Lies book tour there,
Right.
but I went on last Friday for a PCR COVID test.
Okay.
And let me tell you, the Hungarians do not play with this stuff. First of all, they get in the back of your mouth and you're gagging. They're swabbing the back of your mouth. And then they go up your nose. And the guy was like, sir, please relax your nose and all that. And then boom. I wanted to say to the guy, I think you should ask me to marry you after that. It was terrible.
Yeah.
So after all that, I told him, I'm flying on Monday at noon. Oh, don't worry, sir. We'll get your results back. No results. I had to cancel my flight, then go today I got to go tomorrow. But I had to go after I canceled the flight and rebooked. I had to go to a different place. I'm not fooling with those people again. It was under a bridge in a little, like a box, like one of those shipping containers. No, it's a clinic, a mobile clinic.
Oh my God.
I had to go there, and I am standing under the bridge waiting for my number to be called. And you can smell like the bum piss.
Yes.
And it was sweet and disgusting, and you're just gagging. And he finally calls me in, and no nose. That's the good news. No nose stuff. But we're getting real busy with the back of the mouth. Kale, I was like, you know how when you dry heave, you're like,
Yeah, of course.
I did that 6 times. And I said, I'm sorry. He goes, is normal reaction.
Normal. That reaction.
So I still, as you and I are talking, I still haven't gotten the results back. He said it would be 15 hours, which means it should come in overnight. But oh my God, I'm looking at this big schedule I have of all this book tour stuff because my book is getting published all over Europe this summer.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know that I really want to travel that much.
Well, I mean, and so none of this matters. I mean, you've gotten the vaccine, and so none of this matters. Like,
it matters to France. All right, and when I come back from France to Budapest, to Hungary, the fact that I'm vaccinated means I'm cool.
All right.
But it's so weird. Everything is different in each country, and things are really, really opening up here in Hungary. And people here, when you talk to them about it, they're grateful, but they credit the Orban government because he didn't sit around and wait for the EU to get its act together, because they didn't.
Right.
He got vaccines from China and from Russia. So, for better or for worse, this country, Hungary, is a lot more active now than the rest of Western Europe.
Well, it's interesting you say that for 2 reasons. First of all, I teach here in the States, and we've got a number of students, international students, and we have students, especially the students from Canada, and they really are struggling. Canada is a mess as far as not only just the handling of various outbreaks and quarantine situations, but also the rollout of the vaccine. And so like we have kids, from Quebec who are students here, and they're totally locked down still in Quebec. And so they're frankly happy to be here. And for all of the sort of the hand wringing about how awful our response has been and the handling of things have been, doesn't really seem that way to me now. And it sounds to me like Europe is still really a mess. And I wonder if is that just the sort of the sclerosis or the decadence of their own bureaucracies? I wonder.
That's exactly what I'm hearing, that when you talk to different Europeans, and not just Hungarians, but other Europeans, they blame the sclerosis of the EU bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. And they're really mad about it. I would not be surprised at all if there was a political upheaval over all this.
Interesting.
People are fed up.
Yeah.
But here in Hungary, you can do just about anything. Things change by the day. Yeah. Now, if you can prove you've been vaccinated, you can go sit in restaurants, without your mask.
Yep.
But here's the thing: they won't take American vaccine cards.
Oh.
You got to get the Hungarian kind. And so I probably won't be here long enough to worry about that. But
sure.
But the weird thing too, though, is you still have to wear your mask outside. So you see the weird thing of people cycling through the. I know. God, except if you're smoking or drinking something. So
well, hey, who am I to judge? I guess I'll just have to drink and smoke my way through Europe. I mean,
it's crazy. I mean, because like today, I was walking. I went on up to under the bridge to get my COVID thing.
Seriously,
I went and bought a small coffee and drained it pretty quickly. But I carried the cup with me for the 2-mile walk home. I wanted to walk home. I like walking.
Right.
For the 2-mile walk home, so I could do it without my mask.
I was going to say you should just get a pack of smokes, some Galabazé or whatever those French cigarettes were. They're just brutal.
Over here, the smoking is out of control. And Kale, it's like our childhood.
Yeah, right. Throwback.
So many. You can't smoke indoors, in restaurants and things. But you have on the streets, young people. I mean, it's heavy. And I think I might have mentioned in an earlier podcast, I told my son, Matt, who's here, I said, Matt, this is how Dad grew up.
Yeah.
Everybody on the street smoking.
Yeah.
But
it's amazing that culture has persisted in Europe in a way that it just simply has not here. I mean, it's been essentially snuffed out. I mean, gosh, maybe we've had this conversation before online. I don't know if we've done it in the podcast, but man, you're right. Growing up, everybody smoked. You said yourself, your parents smoked. Everybody smoked, and now nobody smokes. Like honestly, when I see somebody smoking a cigarette, I have to admit, I'm like kind of super judgy about it. Like,
yeah.
What are you doing?
And back in America, it's usually, I mean, I'm generalizing, but it's working class people, the young people who smoke. Yeah. Over here, it's young people to a lot of them smoke. I mean, it's really, really striking. That is a huge cultural difference. And, people here are surprised to hear it. I'm like, if you went to America, you just wouldn't see young people smoking. You would see some vaping, and there's a lot of vaping here too, but it's
even that has waned from my perspective.
Has it?
Yeah, a little bit. Not entirely. I don't want to be naive about it, but it's definitely waned a good bit. But look here, I'm struck by something you said that Orban, in his frustration with the EU, did a very interesting move. That is, he's sort of gone east for some practical solutions to the COVID problem. I think this sort of segues, I think, into one of the things that we want to talk about today, right? This idea of looking to the east as opposed to the west.
Right. That one of the things that I was aware of before I came here, just very generally, is that the Prime Minister Viktor Orban, the conservative prime minister of this country, has pivoted in the past few years towards Russia and China. Mm-hmm. He gave a speech, you can find this online, back in 2014, in which he talked about how he wanted to make Hungary an illiberal democracy. That's how he put it, illiberal democracy. And what he meant by that very generally was that he looked west and saw that the West was falling apart. Mm-hmm. And he's a Democrat. He's not an autocrat, and but he does not think Western Europe and the U.S. serve as a good model for Hungary. And he talked about nations that would. He mentioned China. He mentioned Singapore, which is also not. And he's been criticized heavily by the Atlanticist types in this country and in the U.S. and Western Europe.
I'm not familiar with that
Atlanticist, people who believe. Yeah, people who believe in like NATO and the institutions between that America and Europe are part of one civilization.
So the body of water, the Atlantic Ocean, being the sort of the joiner of these two.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
Exactly, and you can understand why Atlanticists criticize it, because it's troubling. Hungary has been a Western nation. Mm-hmm. It's been Christian for 1,000 years. It was until World War I. It was connected to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? Yeah. So why are they doing this? And as we've discussed on previous episodes, the Hungarian government has reached out to China, and China is going to build a $1 billion campus here of Fudan University in Shanghai. And it's all very, very troubling, even to people like me. I don't trust China one bit, even though I'm a big critic of my own country, the way we're behaving. This worries me. So this past week, well, let me back up a little. I think I may have talked about this here, but whenever I talk to people in this country, I'm not talking about government people. I'm talking about people like waiters, baristas, cab drivers,
Look at you.
Cleaning ladies, housewives, people.
Look at you, Tom Friedman, doing the taxi driver thing, right?
I knew it. Well, yeah, I feel like such a boob.
I love it. I love it.
But whenever I meet people outside my official circles, like academics, not people like that, because maybe they have a vested interest in the status quo. But I talk to the ordinary voters, and hang on. And so I asked them, what do you think about politics? Don't try to lead them in any way. What I get from almost every single person is, yeah, there's corruption in the government. Orban is giving too many government contracts, sweetheart deals to his friends. But I'm gonna vote for him because the left will sell the country out, will let migrants in, and bring gender ideology, LGBT stuff.
So immigration and gender ideology keep popping up. Interesting.
Huge. And the immigration thing is really all about sovereignty. National sovereignty means everything to these people. And this is one of the things that I continue to learn. I've been here a month now. They have been invaded so many times over the years by the Turks, by the Tartars, Soviets, on and on and on. And they feel that they desperately want to maintain control of their country, their country's fate. They over here, man, every time you meet somebody new, you can almost set your watch by the time they'll start talking about the Treaty of Trianon. Yeah. Did you even know what that was before?
I did not. No, not until I started talking with you about it. I had no idea.
Right. Well, it's just the treaty that settled World War I. Austria-Hungary was defeated, and it set Hungary's borders, and it dismembered the country. This is so raw for these people, as we've discussed before. So, but you get the whole sense of sovereignty here. When Viktor Orban back in 2015 told Angela Merkel and the EU that, no, we're not taking in these migrants from Afghanistan and Syria and all that. He was widely hated for it. They loved him here because they're a small country with a declining population and nobody else speaks their language in the world. They're the only Magyars there are. And they're acutely aware of that. Anyway, so with all that in mind, one of the things I've found in the conversations I've had this past week is this explains the turn to China and Russia, or this is part of the explanation. I went to interview a man, I call it Peter Kreko, Kreko. I'll be writing about this on my blog. It might be on my blog by the time the podcast comes out. But I had asked a Hungarian friend, I said, listen, I want to go speak to somebody who's in the opposition, who doesn't like Orban, but who's not crazy, because Hungarian politics are just as divided as ours are. Yeah. And he goes, I got just the guy for you, Peter Kreko. He's he's a social psychologist. He's a principled member of the opposition. He doesn't like Orban, but you can talk to him.
Yeah.
So I went to see him, and we had a good 45 minutes. And he gave me in detail his complaints about the government. He said they're setting up this like Putin-like state where you get favored people and blah blah blah, and all of that is true. Although a friend of mine who's a Hungarian who grew up in Chicago said, yeah, and that's just Mayor Daley, Chicago, circa 1960.
Yeah, I hate to be so cynical about corruption, but if that just seems kind of par for the course the last 100 plus years.
Right. It's just that they say it's normal, and the Orban supporters I've talked to here said, you don't think the socialist government before Orban was corrupt? Anyways, Peter Kreko's like, it's that corruption really bothers me. And he's right to be bothered by it. Corruption should bother all of us. But and he said, this is so interesting, Kale. He was talking about how he calls himself an Atlanticist. And he said, I really worry about Orban turning towards China and to a lesser extent Russia, because I believe that we ought to be on the side of the West. And I, in theory, Kale, I'm going along with him on this. But then he starts talking about LGBT. And he said, look, I'm in favor of gay marriage. They don't have gay marriage here. They have domestic partnerships, but not gay marriage, because I'm in favor of gay marriage. I'm in favor of gay adoption rights. I don't understand any of this transgender stuff. And he sort of made the gesture with his hands like, I can't even get into all that. Yeah. And I said to him, Peter, your position is a position of a thoughtful liberal circa 2008, 2010.
Yep.
You wanted gay rights, but the trans stuff was just a bridge too far, and we'll go this far and no further. I said, and now, Peter, you could not take that position in an American university without being denounced.
Yeah, no, yeah.
And I looked at him, and I think he's a good man. It's hard for him to comprehend. And he mentioned that some of his friends in America who teach and universities, they're telling him they're getting really tired of some of this stuff. I said, man, this is real. And Peter said, I can still, on the upside, I can still stand in my classroom and denounce the government. And I said, and that's a good thing. You should be able to do that. But and you could do it in America. Obviously, nobody cares about the government, but you could not stand there and denounce Black Lives Matter. You could not stand there and denounce transgender ideology without losing your job.
Well, that's what's so interesting to me, right? That you and I grew up in a world in which we were very much scared of the government, right? In this sort of, we're always a couple of, hop, skip and jump away from something like an Orwellian nightmare,
right?
Or even that kind of, the sort of the pink police state of Brave New World. But what I'm fascinated with in our moment, and what I simply did not see at all, full disclosure, is that it wouldn't be the government per se that would be the police,
right?
That it's like we are each other's police in a strange sort of way. Like, I don't get that, but it's real, and it's so frustrating when people will not acknowledge, the threat. They'll make fun of so-called cancel culture and all this, and as you and I, in our own respective ways, have had to deal with it. Not explicitly, because you work at TAC and, I work at a school, but it's other people. It's not institutions.
Yeah. And I the next day after this conversation with Peter Krako, I met with a guy who's an academic. He doesn't teach in Hungary, he teaches in the West, but he has a home here. And he's an older man, who has taught for many years in America and the UK. And he's just beyond furious and depressed at what's happening into the academy and in the West. And he was talking about the breakdown of fairness, about how ideology is rolling over everything. He told me, he said, nobody hates the Soviet Union more than I did. Was a defector from Hungary.
Right.
Nobody hates them more than I did. But the stuff that's going on now in Western universities didn't even happen in the Soviet Union. He said even the Marxists wanted there to be accuracy in math and science and things like that. And achievement mattered.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take him to a point. I get what he's saying, and I'm sympathetic to it. But what is it, Lysenkoism? I mean, the Soviets had to deal early on with so-called sort of Marxist math or Soviet science. So it was a lesson I think they had to learn the hard way. But you're right. I mean, I think that look, they needed their planes to fly and they needed their radar to work, and they needed these things to work. And so at some point, the ideology has to take a back step to sort of what is.
Right.
And whereas we are dealing with fantasies, essentially.
Yeah. And this professor said, so do you really think, he's talking to me, he said, do you really think that I'm worried about Fudan University coming to this country? Because the Chinese are not going to force us to accept gender ideology. They're not going to force us to accept immigrants. He said, I don't think that they necessarily have our best interest at heart. But, when I look west, and I don't want, he said, I'm going to be dead soon anyway. But he said, I don't want my country, my homeland, to be ravaged by the same ideological disease that is destroying my adopted homeland. And it's just really, really, it's a hell of a thing to be sitting in a former communist country and see that this is what the promise of the West has come to.
Rod, as children of the Cold War, you and I both grew up. It's hard, I think, to explain to our younger audience members what it was like to understand that there was an actual and real threat of nuclear annihilation, that we grew up with it. I mean, we sort of you become somewhat inured to it on a day-to-day basis, but all of us had to face the reality that, look, at any moment, with a either on purpose or because of a mistake, we'd have a couple of minutes to live. And that, I think that has a tremendous impact on how you conceive of the world. And maybe that's why, in some respects, there really is a kind of difference between your rank and file Gen Xer, your rank and file boomer, but your rank and file Gen Xer and your rank and file millennial, and certainly Zoomer, that we grew up in a world where the traumatic memory of World War II and its dramatic end vis-a-vis the bomb, was a very real thing, and that the Cold War was really just a continuation of the brokered peace of the bomb, and that has a way of grounding you, a certain heaviness to how you go about things, that I wonder if we don't have that right now. That's such a threat. I mean, in fact, I think that I can imagine some of the young people that I know, that I've taught, some of the millennials, that they look at me and shake their head and be like, you're just you're a scared old loser who actually thought you'd get annihilated by, the Soviets weren't that bad. I mean, after all, the New York Times has told me that the sex lives of the rank and file Soviet were much better than the sex lives of us today, or whatever that weird article was 6 months ago.
Sex was better under socialism.
There's a sort of a comic bookization of the Cold War, and I worry about, maybe this is sort of a topic that we can come back to a little bit later on. But my point is, when we conceive of the future, when we conceive of destiny, when we conceive of, for us, that was freedom. So even lefties, like even, I've been a conservative, since my early 20s, but even lefties in the Cold War recognized that, you had to be for Radio Free Europe because the Soviets were the baddies. I mean, REM, and by any stretch of the imagination, is a left-wing, culturally sensitive group. They were singing about Radio Free Europe because it actually meant something. Sure. That the unfreedom of the East meant that the West was the destiny, right? That your destiny was, get out of there, get over the, jump across the wall and find a way to get into West Berlin. And now, you sort of, I've always taken for granted that the West was the sort of the destiny. And now
we're the bad guys.
Well, right. That's, are we the baddies?
Yeah. No, but it's true. I've had a party trick in the past week or so here, that whenever I get into these kind of conversations, I pull out my phone and show them either or either one or both of the ads, the woke CIA recruitment ad, right. Or the U.S. Army recruitment ad where the woman soldier says she grew up with two mommies and how she considers her service in the military to be an extension of fighting for freedom with gay rights. And Kale, you ought to see the looks on people's faces in this country. They're like, is this a joke? Is this from your Saturday Night Live?
Right. But is this the Babylon Bee?
Yeah. But if we saw this, if you and I saw this back home, or if I was just watching this in America, we'd roll our eyes, as a lot of us have done. But over here, people look at you and they're like, this is what's happening. I showed it to one guy and he just said, it was this old professor. He said, America's doomed. And he said it with this look of such sorrow. He felt, go ahead. You could tell he felt that the things he had fought for so long, given his life for, were just going up in smoke.
I mean, he was a dissident, right? I mean, he actually lived.
He defected
under the thumb of the Soviet Union satellite states. He got out. He went west. He went to the United States of America and found freedom and a destiny.
He went to the UK.
Yeah, and created. That's what I mean. West, created a life for himself, and I'm sure his family. And now he looks you square in the face and says, "The West is doomed." All right, so Rod, how does that make you feel? No, but really, I mean, like, what is that? How does that strike you? I mean, how does that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I tell you, what's starting to hit me, and I've been hearing this since I came here in one way or the other. And, but I'm now, before I came over here, a couple of friends of mine, conservative friends of mine, they were being serious. They said, check out Hungary and see if this is the kind of place we could go to if things get really bad over here. And they were joking, but they were also, I think, really serious. And, it's just impossible for me to imagine ever leaving America. But I have to tell you that I worry about my kids, the kind of world they're going to grow up in, because things are going so fast. Just today, as you and I are talking, I had a conversation earlier today with someone in the UK who was involved in this controversy at Eton College. All the
I know Eton. I know Eton. That's sort of the the playground of all of the future rulers of Britain. Well, what's going on? Right. What's going on in Eton?
Well, this has all been in the news. This guy, Will Noland, he was a professor there. He's a conservative, a Christian, all that. He was a well-loved and respected professor. He got kicked out because he wanted to present alternatives to gender ideology that the new woke headmaster was pushing on him, and they would not allow any alternatives to be presented at all. And he said, well, I've already done a lesson. I'm at least going to put it on my private YouTube channel, which I've set up there. This is not endorsed by the school. Wasn't good enough for him. They fired him. And now this is all gone to some kind of arbitration. But so I was talking to somebody today who's close to the case. And this person was telling me it's a sort of thing you and I've talked about before, about how the corruption of the institutions is where the revolution is happening. And this guy I talked to, he walked me through in heavy detail. I mean, it's a detail that's no point bringing up here, but it was just, he was talking about how this institution, Eton, became corrupted, why it's such a big deal. This is like Harvard and Yale. And he said that people don't get it. And this is the thing that really got to me. He said that even talking to other people whose kids go there, they're appalled too by the wokeness, but nobody will take a stand, because in the end, they want their kids to graduate with a diploma from Eton so they can join the elites.
Yeah. Parents seem to have principle until that principle runs against their plan for their children's future. I mean, I've seen this in my own line of work. And I can have, the most rock rib, sort of conservative, faithful Catholic family and dad. And I'm talking to mom and dad about X, Y, and Z. And I've learned that I've had to sort of have a little bit of, double, a double personality. There's double talk going on, because I know very few people who would look me in the face and say, yeah, like my kid got into Harvard, but they're crazy at Harvard, so we're going to go to, UD instead.
Yeah.
I'm not in that world. I didn't go to the fancy colleges. I don't work in
you went to LSU. Come on, don't put yourself down.
I love LSU. That, but I was going to go to LSU. I mean, at the time, I'm pretty sure I was the first class that was not open enrollment. But I would have qualified. I qualified for TOPS. But my point is, I don't work in New York City. I don't work at a hedge fund. I don't work in the quarters of elite circles. And maybe that's in part what saves me from having that kind of class anxiety, because I just want my kids to not be crazy. And I don't mean to sound like a jerk, but I really don't want my kids to be crazy, and no amount of biting or slicing of that apple, using that apple on purpose here. That's just not a temptation for me, but I know it really is for people.
Because this is rare, though,
because they don't want to be weird. I mean, this is what we talked about, 4, 5, 10 episodes ago. Like, if we're going to live this life, you got to be weird, and you got to be willing to be weird. And you got to be willing to look your kids in the face and say, yeah, we're weird. So at any rate, I don't know how we got here. How
Well,
did
no,
we get to,
but no, this is actually a good point to talk about
yeah,
something else big that happened this weekend
yeah.
that's going to have real
Oh,
implications
we were talking
for.
about Eaton. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, but Baylor University over late last week, the regents of Baylor University finally flipped and agreed to, welcome charter an LGBT student organization at this Texas Baptist University, and
Mhm.
it's a monumental thing. I mean, to let you know how fast this has gone. Until the late '90s, Baylor banned dancing.
Wow.
You couldn't dance at Baylor,
Right.
but because that's how Baptist they were.
It's a Baptist
It's a
university.
Baptist
Yeah.
university, and now the regents put out this statement. I mean, it is just I put this on my blog. I encourage listeners to go see it. It is just a perfect example of moralistic therapeutic deism and the lies that they tell themselves to justify what they know can't be justified.
Mhm.
They were talking about how we at Baylor we still stand for biblical values on sexuality, blah blah blah, but
Mhm.
we realize that gays and lesbians commit suicide, and we've got to care for our gay and lesbian. So that's why we're changing. Well, I mean, this is there, and we're changing because we care like Jesus cared.
Sure. Sure.
Please.
So right. So there's all of the therapeutic language and the threat of suicide, I presume, the threat of self-harm for people who are in the LGBTQ plus communities. And it's a fascinating thing to watch everyone jump on board of this fundamentally therapeutic worldview. I mean, look, this is in part what Truman talks about in The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, is that the feeling self trumps all, even and maybe even especially principle, and especially in a university. The university used to, on some level, stand for a body of knowledge and a community of knowledge generating people concerned with the truth. They were not concerned with, at least not primarily, are not concerned with the therapeutic well-being of its clients. And I use that word client on purpose because I believe that the universities are in a big bind, and it's ultimately a financial bind. We know that we are heading toward a demographic cliff of some sort. And so all of these colleges are in a rush to secure future funds because they understand that their future depends upon loan dollars from future marks. And so Mark as a person, and therefore they have to have the full panoply of therapeutic offerings, both academic and extra academic, in order to secure funding. And you have to ask yourself the question that if you are an institution that its sole purpose is just to continue in perpetuity itself as an institution, independent of mission, then what are you doing? What is all this for?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I don't believe that the people at Baylor who have this institute this new policy, I don't think that they believe this therapeutic stuff that they're saying. I think it's just they're saying this to hide the fact that they actually want. They actually believe there's nothing wrong with LGBT, that's something that ought to be affirmed. They know that they can't do this, that there's a clear contradiction between what they say they believe as Baptists and this. So they're coming up with the therapeutic rationale for it. I think what it has more to do with middle class mores. That's entirely what it is. They know that if they stick to the what the Bible says about sexuality, that will put them at total odds with middle class mores.
Well, look, Rod, you and I both know this. Like, we're not making any friends by talking like this.
No,
I mean, I've radically shrunk, the people who will consider me, a human being to, a small sliver of the known universe now. I don't say that proudly
because you believe what your church teaches about.
Well, right. I actually, I believe there's such a thing as a sacred order, and that my task in life is to submit myself to that sacred order. The details, they are what they are, and how much easier it would be to not.
Yeah, well, the
I
Southern
mean,
Baptist.
you know this. I mean, like how much? I mean, how many more friends would we have if we just said, that sacred order, whatever.
Yeah, well, my Al Mohler, the Southern Baptist theologian, in his podcast today, he talked about the Baylor thing, and he brought up
Mm,
something that it hadn't occurred to me, but this is huge. He said the NCAA is throwing its weight around
yeah,
on universities and on states, but
yeah,
on trans issues.
yeah.
And Mohler reminded his listeners, I don't pay attention to college basketball. I didn't know this, but Baylor University won the Final Four this year.
Yeah.
They're the national basketball champs.
Yeah.
Well, what if the national basketball champs could no longer compete in the Final Four or in the championship tournament because of the LGBT
Right.
policies
See,
on campus?
right.
So we see who the real God is there in
Right.
sports.
Well. Yeah. But interesting, and it's not even just sports, but it's the accrediting agencies of said sports, right? I mean, like any college can, suit up 5 people to play a game of basketball, right? That's anybody can do that. Like you can just go out to the local playground and you can have a bunch of shirts that say, my university, and put my name and a number on the back, and we can go play basketball. But can you play basketball in a sanctioned event? And of course, the carrot is that you get to play against the best competition as organized and refereed, literally and figuratively, by the NCAA. And so that is what you mean by that. But I think there's a larger point to be made about accrediting agencies, right? I mean, Baylor doesn't need the NCAA to be a university. But they need it because basketball is, I guess, on some level, basketball, football, et cetera, at the D1 level, is what you might call a loss leader, which is you pay a ton of money to compete on all of these various stages and platforms because that drives admissions, right? That doesn't mean that, I didn't play football. I wasn't going to play football at that level. I could play peewee ball, right? But I want to go to a school where I can watch my LSU football Tigers play against Baylor Bears or whatever it may be. And we know that young people go to colleges, it's not because, man, I can't wait to take, Dr. Zeldin's course on Shakespeare. No, they can't wait to go so they can go on Saturday night to the football game. Which is its own mission creep, right? I mean, it's its own issue. So Baylor is selling itself out to the NCAA.
Yeah, and I just, they're going to, it's like Walker Percy's letter to the New York Times about abortion goes, you're going to keep doing you're going to do what you want to do, but you're going to be told what you're doing. Yeah, similarly with Baylor and Christian universities that capitulate like this, they should not be allowed to get away with it. We can't stop them from doing it, but they need to be called out and said, you're lying. You're a bunch of phonies. And there's some of us at least who will know that. But, this past week, I haven't seen more than just beyond the headlines, but even a school like St. John's College, the Great Book School, I read that they have dismissed a teacher for using the N-word. She was reading a passage from Mark Twain.
Sure.
And she put it in context. She goes, this is in the book. And, I'm not, it didn't matter. One kid complained.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Yeah. So, okay. So back to our question about the future. We see all around us, and I think you can see it acutely because you're a stranger in a strange land, looking back at your homeland and seeing just how strange it is. And you've been chronicling, the decadence, to use our friend Ross's term for all of this. So you've got this huge rotting carcass of the West. And it's sort of, lumbering, it's sort of, teetering back and forth. And, it's hard not to see that the foundations themselves are not rotten. We see this in institutions all across, et cetera, et cetera. So who owns the future, Rod?
Oh, I think China. I don't know that I would have said that before I came here. I would have thought, I thought maybe. But when you get out of America, as I've done, I'm just be here for the summer, and you try to see things through the eyes of a people, the Hungarians, who are part of the West, but they are not because of the accident of history of the Soviet occupation. They re-entered history after the fall of the Cold War, but they're wavering. They're part of the European Union, but now they're beginning to wonder, is this worth what we're going to have to give up? And they can look to what's happening in America and see this rise of a new kind of totalitarianism. It's not a joke to them. I get called an alarmist back in America for the things I'm saying, but over here, my book is not out yet in Hungary. But they said, "So what's your book about?" Because I bet it was on the cover of a magazine here. I said, "Well, I'll tell you."
Let me tell you.
And they're like, "Well, yeah, it's bizarre. It doesn't have to be explained to them." Wow. But if you're a Hungarian, you're looking to China, which is a totalitarian country, right? But it's one kind of. There are two forms of totalitarianism, and this is something that our people back in America just absolutely can't see. They cannot imagine why it is that people in Hungary, anybody, would look to what's happening in America and see anything but liberalism and expanding individual rights and things like that. There was a piece today by Richard Hanania, who writing about how NGOs, the culture of NGOs, literally the people within them can't see how anybody could object to what they have to say. And their take on democracy, there is either democracy or there's autocracy, and whatever they call democracy, that's what is democracy. Well, it's frightening to me to see, because I've written about China, lived out my lives. I wrote about how China, surveillance capitalism and all that. But man, I tell you, to sit down and talk to Hungarians, and it's to see, I would be scared too. And they're right to be scared of what we represent.
So what's so fascinating to me about this, as I'm sort of trying to listen to what you're saying and kind of recalibrate my own frame here, even though I'm a social conservative, and therefore I don't believe in progress per se. I'm deeply skeptical of things like progress. I don't believe that history has an arc that our betters like to talk about. I believe in the actual apocalypse, and I believe in the actual end of history in Christian terms, of course. But even me, as a sort of a progress skeptic, I have to kind of admit, like right now, as you're saying this stuff out loud, I still kind of believed progress. I sort of believed that the future is real and that will be okay. But I'm having to recalibrate my own faith in the future. The future is, there's nothing etched in stone that says the future is going to be good.
Yeah, this past week I was interviewed by a freelancer writing for the New York Times Magazine. She's doing a big piece on the post-liberal right, and she flew down from Berlin to talk to me and a couple other folks. And she was really intelligent, and I negotiated with her to see my quotes before she uses them, because I told her flat out, I said, I don't trust the Times or any. She gets that. But she was an Ivy League graduate, born and raised Madison, Wisconsin, Ivy League graduate, identifies on the left. But I could tell from talk, I really enjoyed spending time with her. We hung out for like 3 hours, but I could tell that she genuinely doesn't understand people like me and you. And it's not, she's an intelligent person. It wasn't like the sort of visceral hostility, but it's like she just never met people like us. And she's doing this piece because she goes, I really want to understand it.
But I thought diversity was a major factor in universities in the country. I thought diversity was there, right? I mean, what's the problem?
I said to her, we were talking about journalism, and I just talked about how over the course of my 32 years as a professional journalist, I've seen the field standards collapse. And she said, well, in the New York Times, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, how many conservatives do you have there? Because, well, Ross Douthat. I said, name another one. She couldn't.
Yeah, you can't.
And then she says, well, we needed to diversify. I said, yeah, but you don't have any conservatives there at all. You have all kinds of people from various colors and gender expressions and blah, blah, blah. All of whom think alike. And those who don't think alike are terrified to say otherwise. But it's just, I don't mean to crack on her because she was
No,
great.
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
but I'm just saying that it was really interesting to me to see this really intelligent, well-educated, thoughtful person say just really not get where we're coming from. You know what she said? That this was so interesting to me. She said, I think we're talking about the left. She said, I think what happened was when Trump got elected, that was such an apocalyptic moment for people like me, meaning leftists,
Yeah.
that we didn't understand how that could happen in our country. The country wasn't what we thought it was, and therefore anything we did to fight that was justified. Now, she wasn't saying this is how she herself felt. She was just saying, trying to explain to me why the left went so extreme so fast.
Right.
And well, and that makes sense to me. I mean,
it does. It has the ring of truth to it because, again, if you believe that the arc of history is destiny, especially when somebody like President Obama says that.
Following Obama.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see why this cracked people's brains, and boy, it really has. And I know that this is we've been over this turf before, but it really has cracked people. I mean, it's extraordinary. But but this future business, we have kids, and and I very much care about the future. It's really, I have to say, it's unsettling. I'm going to have to think about this more because I don't have any, frankly, good thoughts. I don't feel very good about the thought that the West might not be the future. I've always believed in it, and maybe that's just because I grew up in the wake of boomer optimism or something. I don't know how to even. I don't know how to think about it without the West as being the sort of the holder of the future.
The West has been the future since the New World was discovered.
I mean, really, right? Yeah, it's wow. This is
and I mean, so we really are at the end of something big, and it's I think I know we're coming to the end of our time here, but I think that is the thing that I'm been so shocked by, is to come over here and to have a different perspective on the sort of things that I've been talking about for a while, and begin to say, holy crap, I'm right. And I don't want to be right because it's because I have kids, and I'll have grandkids one day maybe. But if I lived in this country, and again, this is the thing that people keep saying is, they worry about their kids. I talked to this one young woman who's a student this week. We had coffee, and I was just asking her about her politics, and same thing. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about this government, but I want my country to still be here when I'm old. And she, by that she meant she didn't want migrants to overwhelm it. And she said, and she lives with her partner, so it's not a Christian thing. She goes, and I want my kids not to have to be told that they're a girl when they're a boy, and vice versa. It's that simple and that elemental with her. And she knows, she's 22 years old, but she knows that this is what the West means, is that she would have to give those things up. And
so it strikes me in this conversation, you talk about from a Hungarian standpoint, there are two basic threats. There's the external threats of migration, of immigration, and there's the internal threat of sort of culture. And I think in our own country, the thought of an external threat is frankly, barring something extraordinary, it's laughable, right? The Mexicans are not going to come and take over the country. The Canadians are not going to flood in from the north and take over the country, not in our lifetimes. But the primary threat is an internal one, right? And it's a self-identifying internal problem. And I think this is why you and I really think hard about it. And I got to tell you, as I hear you talk and as I sort of watch the signs and look around me, we're crazy. Like, and I know it sounds kind of pithy and maybe even histrionic or hyperbolic, but like there's a deep cultural psychopathy that we are watching unfold around us. And I don't think you can say that enough. Like, it's crazy, and people are not well. They're mentally unwell, and all of these forces that we're watching and kind of trying to dodge and avoid. Like, it's not well. And then when you see the videos of these conversations, you've referenced many times the Christakis conversation, and there are many more of those so-called confrontations, and they primarily happen at universities. But the kids are not all right to sort of spout the cliche from the Who, right? I mean, we're not well. And I want us to sort of get back to the point where we can actually have conversation, a fruitful conversation, but I'm not terribly optimistic.
No, and as you and I are talking, Israel and the Palestinians are still fighting. Right. Well, I saw a video of some Palestinian activists driving through a neighborhood of London on the loudspeaker saying, "F the Jews, rape their mothers," and et cetera. In France, there's has to be round the clock guards around synagogues. I live next to the Jewish quarter here in Budapest. I walk through it every day when I go to work, and there's nobody standing in front of the synagogues here or Jewish businesses. Jews are safe here. This is, and we are told by our media that the Orban government is anti-Semitic. But in fact, Jews are safer here than they are in London and in Paris.
In Paris. Rod, what's crazy, we're not 100 years removed from the Holocaust. We're not 100 years removed from the Holocaust. Like, there are still people alive right now. They're dying every day. That number gets smaller and smaller. But there are people who actually lived through the Holocaust in the camps. And here we are. It's just it's a stunning rebuke to the idea of progress. And I need to remember that. I really need to remember that. I need to not fall prey to my own sort of sanguine optimism that I have temperamentally.
But here's what Orban said back in 2015 when the migrants came in. They don't want this stuff here. They look at France, and France is on the might possibly have a civil war. That's what those generals warned about. Because of the unassimilated and unassimilable Islamic radical population there. London's got this problem too. It doesn't exist here because they didn't accept Islamic immigrants. And Jews can walk the streets safely here in Hungary. There is anti-Semitism here. There's an anti-Semitic party, a minor party. So this is not paradise. Yeah. But it was so striking to me. I was wondering when I went to work on Friday, I was walking through the Jewish neighborhood, and I thought, man, am I going to see armed guards outside the synagogues? And no, wow. There were Jews on the street, getting ready for Shabbat. And what a blessing that is. So again, look at what's happening in London right now. Look at what's happening in France. If you're a Hungarian, you say, that's not happening in my country. Right. Why is it not happening in my country? And how can I keep it from happening in my country? But it's not fate.
But the dissonance, right? I think the thing that you and I still struggle with, we can see all that very clearly. And, the Jews are always the canary in the coal mine. Always, always, always. It's the strangest, most enduring tell of any kind of impending meltdown. But you look at the Chinese, and the Chinese Communist Party is engaged in their own genocide against the Uyghurs. It's like, I get what your conversation partners are saying in terms of why we not look to the West, but we look to the East. And I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at the craziness of sort of the woke West, and I don't know. I don't know where sanity resides. I don't know where it is.
You're right.
Look, but I'll say this, and you and I can say this to one another because we're friends, and our podcast listeners are our friends. There's no answer to this except in Christ. I mean, there's no answer except a way that we can reconnect ourselves to our spiritual destinies, that are real, and all of the attempts to patch over that and to sort of ignore that inner spiritual reality, I think are doomed. I do.
They are, and this is the thing that I'm going to write something for a Hungarian conservative website. This is the thing I would say to them. It's that, you fear what's coming from the West, and you're right to fear what's coming from the West. But that fear and any move that you make, any political move, geopolitical move to stop migration, or like the Orban government put into the Constitution a couple of years ago that a marriage is between one man and one woman, that's great. But if you do not return to your faith, your roots in the faith, any victory is going to be very fragile and very temporary. This is not a very religious country. Hey, it's not like Poland. It's not a very religious country.
Well, even in a formerly religious country like our own, I mean, don't forget that I think it was Bill Clinton who passed the Marriage Act, back in within a span of a dozen years, we went from a Democratic president pushing forward a marriage bill that would today, put him on the extreme fringes of acceptable political discourse.
The Defense of Marriage.
The Defense of Marriage. I mean, this stuff can change rapidly, and I think we just lived through it. We really
can.
So politics. So politics is really only as strong as the people who are willing to live up to it, or something.
Only as strong as the culture. I mean, I pointed out I was having a conversation with some Hungarians about what the Fidesz party had done in changing their constitution on marriage. And I said, this is when I knew that the fix was in America. Back in 2005, George W. Bush had just won re-election. He'd run re-election in part on get out the vote stuff and state initiatives, passing amendments to state constitutions protecting marriage.
Right.
And so then Senator Rick Santorum, the Catholic senator from Pennsylvania, he and a few others proposed a federal marriage amendment that would have done the same thing in America.
Yeah.
The Republicans controlled the Senate. It didn't even make it out of the Senate to go to the people.
Yeah.
And George W. Bush burned no political capital on this. And that's when I knew this is the high watermark. It's never going to be better than this. And we can't even get it out of the Senate. This is how useless the Republican Party is on that. And so, but meanwhile, here in Hungary, the Fidesz party, in 2019, I think 2018, 2019, they got it done.
Yeah.
And but as you say, it's if the culture changes, and some Fidesz person I was talking to the other day, some supporter of Fidesz, said, we know that the politics is downstream from culture, and the young people here are not fans of Fidesz.
Yeah, so there it is, right? There it is. It's there's a certain liquid modernity. It's the universal solvent of all cultures, it would seem, and that's why I am sympathetic to our friends like Sarab et al., who recognize the weakness of trying to stand up, the weakness of the talking back to liberalism, because it does seem to be some sort of cultural solvent that I don't know what base can withstand it. I don't.
Yeah. And next week when we talk, I will have been in Paris for a week. I'll be there talking to media about Living Out by Lies. I forget the title in French. It's Résister aux mensonges or something. I think it means resist the lies. But anyway, I'll be there. First time in Paris since 2018.
Nice.
And I'm told that the government is going to open up the terraces so people can actually go to restaurants again as long as they eat outside. And there will be oysters consumed, my friend.
I mean, it's hard to imagine Paris without eating outside. Like that doesn't even make sense to me at all. I can't imagine that. All right. Well, look, in English, why don't you send us out here, Rod?
Okay. Don't get nodding on you.
All right, man. Take care. Bye-bye.